Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be finishing up the backpacks, but there is something I wanted to show first. So with the latest snapshot, Mojang announced something very interesting. Obfuscation maps are now published with all future releases of the game, and that includes 1.14.4. So this is interesting because depending on how things work out, we may be switching to Mojang's official mappings instead of using MCP mappings, which will make modding significantly easier. And I don't know, I'm using some fairly recent mapping. That's not what I was searching for. Crossbow item. So I think the crossbow, for example, still has some, like this funk underscore yada yada yada, and you can see the parameters also have these garbage names. These are actually not the names that Minecraft is obfuscated into. This is, they're transformed into something else. But as you can see, when we get something new, we don't have names for any of these things. Like, what does this function even do? I mean, you might be able to read it and eventually decipher it or make an educated guess at what it does, but now we don't have to do that anymore as much. There is a bit of a catch to it. So I can go ahead and close that, and I've actually got the server mappings for 1.14.4 downloaded. This is what the file looks like. Can I increase size a little bit there? So you can see it's got the full class name, including the package, what it's mapped to, its obfuscated name, so the Quaternion class becomes A, and you can see that all the fields and methods and stuff in here get transformed into things like A, B, C, D, and so on. So what they're doing is they're actually telling us what these are called. Now the catch is, they don't include parameter names, as you can see here, just the type. So that's something that we'll probably have to map on our own if we're even allowed to use these mappings. That's something else that I believe CPW and Lex are investigating right now, so we'll have to see where that goes. I think it'd be kind of weird that they would release this and not allow us to use them. I mean, I guess it's kind of cool as a reference, but it'd be nice if we could just use these mappings directly. Okay, so today we're going to finish backpacks. And so I'm going to be referring to gems for this because I actually added an item recently that has some similar behaviors. So I'm going to be referencing these classes. So we're going to have a class where we're going to register our container types. And we also need to register screens, which were previously called GUIs. And this particular thing here is how gems handles its container types. It's kind of weird because it's an enum. I don't recommend doing things this way because then you have these unchecked casts in here, which are kind of ugly. I mean, this works, but I don't recommend doing that. So we're going to need to make a container screen and a container, and then we're going to have to open that from the item. And containers and screens are often used for tile entities, for instance. So when you go to open a chest, the chest has a tile entity that, when you open it, it makes a container with the inventory of the chest, and it syncs part of that up with the client. So the server and the client have a container instance. And then on the client, a screen is created from the container. I know that's a lot to remember, so hopefully this will make things clear, but I think that's a good short explanation of what's going on. And yes, I will go into presentation mode in just a moment. So I think I've already created all the files I will need, so I can go ahead and do that if I can remember how. So I've already created this mod container types class and added two methods to it. So one is register container types, and you'll see this is a register event, same as we've got with blocks and items. So it is registry event.register of type container type of something. So the container types are generic. So that's one reason the enum thing I was doing before is a little funky, because of the generics. Enums and generics don't always mix. Well, yeah, they don't mix very well. And you'll see a second method here, which I've not called yet. I'll have to remember to fix that. And I'm taking an FML client setup event. This is technically unneeded, but I pass it in just as a way of reminding myself that's where this needs to be done. And you'll notice there's an annotation on this. It is only in dist.client. So in this method, we're going to be calling some things that are marked with that annotation. They only exist on the client. So if this method were to exist on the server, it would crash. And actually, let me go ahead and fix that. So for the register container types, as you can see here, we're just adding a generic listener. Same thing as the mod blocks and mod items. Now let's go down into our client proxy, and we're already catching the client setup event here. So I'm going to say mod container types dot register screens. I'm going to pass it that event, even though it doesn't need it, like I said before. I just like to do that for event handlers. Just pass them the event so you know what it's supposed to be. And I guess another way you could do this is actually just add a listener and call that specifically. So could do fml java mod loading context.get mod event bus add listener mod container types register screens, like that. Yeah, let's actually do that instead. Yeah, that'll be more consistent with what we're doing, so do it that way. Okay, so before we actually register anything in that mod container types class, let's go ahead and write some of the classes we need. So we'll start with the container. So this is going to extend container, and that is net.minecraft.inventory.container.container. So let's go ahead and implement the required methods. It's got one, can interact with, and in this I'm just going to go ahead and return true. Also need a constructor, magic super, so in this case, let me see, there's a specific signature that it needs. Okay, see, ifactory in container type. Okay, yeah, so we need int player inventory. You don't necessarily need to create a constructor that matches this, but it will make something easier in just a moment. So I'm going to remove the container type because we already know what that is. Now, if you were wanting to subclass this, then you would want to leave that in the constructor. But we're not doing that in this case. And actually, this we don't have yet, but I'm going to say mod container types dot backpack. I think I'm going to go ahead and store it like that. So yeah, let's actually go ahead and create that. So that'll be a container type of backpack container. And we are, how do I want to do this? The way I normally do this is I store it in a lazy object. But I think the way I've been doing the tutorial is, yeah, just storing them directly. Okay, so let's get rid of the final. Under register container types, we're going to say backpack is assigned the value of new container type of, and we're going to pass it a method reference, backpack container new. Why do you not like that? Protected access, of course. That needs to be made public. Okay. So if you didn't have a constructor that matched that specifically, you could use a lambda expression there instead. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this to lowercase since it's not final. And I'm going to do an empty private constructor and make this class final. Okay, so now back to the backpack container. Okay, so this will be a little bit more complicated than a tile entity container because we've got a little issue with container items. We don't want the user to be able to put the item in itself. So we're going to need to take that into account and prevent that from happening. So I'm going to go ahead and create a field for the item, an item handler, and an int called blocked. This will be the slot of the player's inventory that the backpack is in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a private static method. We need to actually figure out where the backpack is. It's going to be in one of the player's hands. We know that much. Get held item will be fine. So we'll pass it just the player. Then we're going to say if player.getHeldItem main hand is a backpack item, then we're going to return that. Or if the player's offhand item is a backpack, then we're going to return that instead. And if neither of those are true, we'll just return an empty item stack. What is your problem here? Ah, yes. Get item. Chain of instance objects indicates abstraction failure. I don't care. I think that's fine in this case. Okay, so back to the constructor. We're going to assign the item, get held item, player inventory.player. Now for the item handler, that's a bit more of an issue here. Yeah, let's actually need to go back to the backpack item now. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a few methods here. So let's do a public int get inventory size, pass it the item stack just because, and we'll just say our backpacks are a regular 3-row inventory. So in this case, passing in the item stack doesn't really matter, but just going to go ahead and do that. Generally good to pass in item stacks to any item method. And let's see, the code I'm referencing also has a can store method because the items in gems are actually designed to store specific things, but in this case, I'm not going to do that. Okay, now let's do a method that returns an item handler called getInventory, and we definitely need the item stack in this case. So I'm going to say item stack handler, call that stack handler, assign the value of new item stack handler, and this takes either a size or a list of item stacks, so we're going to say get inventory size of stack. Now we're going to say stack handler dot deserialize NBT. So we're going to be getting the items from the NBT of our backpack. So stack dot get or create tag dot get compound, and we'll grab a compound tag called inventory. And let me actually see, did I add silent lib here? Yeah, let me actually do that. Silent lib actually has a utility that lets you view the NBT of an item, so that'll be a good way to demonstrate what's going on. Just go ahead and hardcode the versions. And that will be 4+. Okay, and finally we need to return the stack handler. And we're also going to have a save inventory method. We will take an item stack, an item handler, and a player. Why am I taking a player there? Yeah, I'm not actually using that. Take that out. So we're going to say if the item handler is not null, and the item handler... We don't even need a null check there. What is with my code? Instance of will always return false if the object is null, so no need to check it. So then we're just going to be storing the data into NBT, cast that to an item stack handler, and say serialize NBT. Okay, so now we need to say this dot item handler is equal to this dot item dot get item, and we need to cast that to backpack item. Dot get inventory this dot item. Okay, so now we need to actually add slots to this container for the items to exist in. So we're going to start with the backpack. So we're going to do a for loop. And we're going to be able to get the number of slots from the item handler like that. And we're going to need an x and a y coordinate. So the x is going to be 8 plus 18 times I mod 9. And the y is going to be 18 plus 18 times I divided by 9. So that will be 9 slots per row, and every 9 slots will move down by 18 pixels. Okay, and finally we will call add slot, and we're going to give it a new slot item handler. Pass our item handler into that. The slot index is I. The x position is x and the y position is y. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just copy in the rest of this. Okay, so we're determining the number of rows, which is item handler dot get slots divided by 9. This y offset is where the player inventory is going to be starting, and that's going to depend on how many rows we've got. So the player inventory, this is everything but the hotbar, so that's going to be 3 rows, 9 slots across. We need to add a slot for every case, and our index is calculated here. So it's a bit different than how I handled it up here. Container code is not the most pleasant to look at, I'll admit that. So the hotbar part is actually a little bit different. So only a single row for the hotbar, so we just got the X. And you'll see we're creating an anonymous class here, and we're overriding canTakeStack, and we're saying that we can take it only if the slot number is not equal to our blocked slot. So if we've got an open backpack, it's going to be in the hotbar or in our offhand. If it's in the hotbar, we need to make sure that it can't be moved. And if it's in the offhand, that's not something we need to worry about because it's inaccessible anyway. And let me just make sure that this code makes sense. So this is where we're trying to determine what the blocked slot is. So we're saying if X is equal to the player inventory's current item, and that current item is the same as the item that we've determined the player is holding, then that's what we're setting our blocked slot to. And actually, I think maybe I will rename that blocked slot. No, I'll leave it. Okay, so there's a little bit more we need to do here. There is one method called transferStackInSlot that we need to override. And looks like I've got a few more methods down here as well. I'll determine in a moment if I need those. So let's go ahead and copy in this one. So transferStackInSlot is responsible for shift-click behavior. It is, the code is not pretty to look at, unfortunately. So that's why I'm just going to go ahead and copy this in, because it's a pain to work with. I'm not typing that out, I'll make a mistake. Looks like I'm also overriding a method called slotClick. So I believe that is necessary as well. And I have my own canTake method down here. Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and add that method in as well. I'm going to change that to, say, return stack.getItem instance of backpack item. And I'm going to go ahead and can make that static, and I'm going to rename it to isBackpack. Okay, and I see one more thing I missed. Let's put that up here. We're going to override onContainerClosed. In this case, we're going to go ahead and call super, and then we're going to say we're going to get the backpack item, this.item.getItem, cast that to a backpack item, and say save inventory. Item, this.item handler. That's it. Okay, so that should be done. I know the code for this is just absolutely hideous, but it's probably about as good as container code can get. Okay, so let's move on to something that's slightly less bad. We're going to go to backpack container screen. So like I said before, this used to be called a GUI, and this is client-side only. We don't actually need that annotation on it in this case, but we're going to be extending container screen of backpack container. So implement methods, that's the only one we need to, that it requires us to implement, but we're actually going to do a couple more methods. So for my constructor, that is exactly what I want. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the fields from the class I'm referencing. So we've got a constant, which is our texture, and this is the texture that Vanilla uses for chest. We're just going to be reusing that. And then we want to hold on to a reference of the player inventory. And we want to know the number of inventory rows. One more thing to add back to the container. Let's do a public int get inventory rows. return this dot item handler dot get slots divided by 9. Okay, so we're going to override a method called render. And in this, we're going to call this .render background before we call super.render. And then after that, we're going to call this .render hovered tooltip. And we're going to pass that the first and the second parameters. So I believe these parameters are mouse X, mouse Y, and partial ticks. Partial ticks is something you see in a lot of rendering stuff. Since the game renders more often than the game engine does its ticks, then we have partial ticks in rendering. Okay, now we're going to override draw container foreground layer. And in this, we're going to be rendering a name for the container and a string that says inventory above the player's inventory. So pretty similar to what a chest does, I believe. Now finally, in draw background layer, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick check, see if Minecraft is null, then we're just going to return. And that'll get rid of some warnings. So we're going to go ahead and say geoStateManager.color4f, and we're going to give it 1111. So we're doing white with no transparency. Now we need to bind our texture. So Minecraft.getTextureManager.bindTexture. We give it the resource location that points to the texture we have. And if you were using a texture that's part of your own mod, you would need to remember to put your mod ID in there. But in this case, we're just using one that exists in Minecraft. Okay, and I'm actually going to go ahead and just copy the next little bit and actually make a couple of changes. Going to rename that to pause X and pause Y. So I put a little comment in here to just kind of indicate what these parameters are. So we've got the X and Y position that we're rendering at. Then we've got 2 sets of UV coordinates that indicate what part of the texture we're rendering. In this case, we're using a texture that has a 54 slot inventory, but we're able to render any number of rows by just rendering that as 2 separate portions. So this is, again, pretty similar to what chests do. And the split method, I forget what that used to be called, something like draw textured rectangle or something like that. It's now called blit, and unfortunately the parameter names are all messed up. I have no idea why these methods are like this in particular. These are... For whatever reason, the parameters are either not mappable or they're mapped to these garbage names. I don't know why exactly that is, but that's why I went ahead and just put in that comment to indicate what the parameters should probably be called. Okay, let's go back to mod container types. And under register screens, we are going to say screen manager.register factory. And in this case, we need to pass it a container type, so that's backpack. Then we need an iScreen factory. So our constructor should already match that, so we're going to say backpack container screen new. And if we look at iScreen factory, functional interface, it takes type T, which is something extends container, player inventory, and iText component. If we look back at our container screen, that's what our constructor is. It matches that. Okay, let me see if I am missing anything here. I know I probably am. We got the container, we got this. We haven't changed the item. That's the next part. Okay, so now we need to override a method. It is on item right click. And we can just delete that, and we're going to first check that the world is not remote, so we're checking that we're on a server. And if we are, we're going to call player_in.openContainer. And this wants an I-named container provider. And if we look at this and see what inherits from it, you can see it's, I believe those are all tile entities, more or less. Simple named container provider. I think that's under container. Yeah, pretty much all tile entities. We do not have a tile entity in this case. What is this simple named container provider? It wants an iContainer provider. Huh, okay. So, I don't think I have any good way to move the window over, but I was actually using an anonymous class in gems. Let me see if we can use a simple named container provider, whatever it was called. So we'll need an iContainer provider, which of course is going to have garbage names. We'll fix those in a minute. So we need, what does that do? Returns a container. So new backpack container of whatever that is, whatever that is. Okay, so let's see, that is int player inventory player entity. Okay, so that is player. That is player inventory. And this is ID. Okay, and now where are we? Is that it? No? Here, yeah. Okay, so now we need something to represent the name. Let's say new translation text component container.tutorial.backpack. Okay, is that it? And of course we can replace that with an expression lambda. Can we format this code in a better way? How's that look? I think that works. Okay, and if we are on the client, then we're going to return new action result. Actually, we'll be falling through to this if we're on the server either way. So regardless, we're going to return new action result enum or action result type.success. And that wants the item that we're using. So that's it. That should open our backpack. Let's go ahead and try running this. Yeah, I honestly didn't know about that simple named container provider. So that is, why did you fail? Am I missing? Yeah, I don't have Maven local in my repositories. So that's why I couldn't find silent lib. Okay, there we go. And now that I'm out of presentation mode, I guess I could show what I was talking about, or so I thought. That window's all messed up. I can't move it. Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, this window's all screwed up for some reason. Come on. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. I was just doing an anonymous class here, which is apparently a bit unnecessary. Okay, so let's try opening it, and it failed. Yeah, I bet I didn't register the container type correctly. Yeah, I did not. I'm just creating it. I'm not registering it. Let's create a method. Register string name container type. Let's make that a generic method. T extends container. Container type of T type. ID is tutorial mod.getID name. Okay, and need to set the registry name to ID, and then actually register it. Containers.register type. Okay, and up here we will be calling register backpack new container type. Got to set the return type there. There we go. Okay, let's try this one more time. So I did have a phone call there, so may have had a bit of an awkward cut. Most of the calls I get are just robocalls, but you never know. Someone could actually want to interview me someday. Okay, and there we go. And of course you can add a translation key to translate that. And if I put something in there, it should stay in there. And I can't click that. Yeah, I did also make it so that you cannot put other backpacks in there at some point. And you can't even pick up the one that you have open. Okay, so let's actually, this is why I added silent lib. It's got a command that lets you view the NBT of objects. So we can see we've got our backpack color that we did last time. And this inventory compound tag is where all of our items are. So you can see we got 27 slots to work with, and it only stores the slots that have something in them. So you can see I put something in slot 13 and 24. Alright, so I know that was a bit more complex. Dealing with containers is a bit of a pain. If you wanted to make something like a chest, it's pretty similar. The difference there is you would need to create a tile entity for it as well, which I guess is something that we'll cover eventually. But we've got an item in our inventory that can store stuff, so that's nice. Of course, with items like this, the reason we don't allow other backpacks in there is because nesting NBT at some point will go very wrong. Minecraft has a maximum depth that the NBT can be nested, so eventually it would become a problem. Alright, so I'm going to kill this recording here so I can get it edited and uploaded. Depending on what happens with those Mojang mappings, we may have to update this project to match that. So that's kind of why I wanted to get this out right now. That, and I'm kind of behind on it. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful. If I need to clarify anything, just let me know. And I'll see you in the next part.